Good afternoon again. I'm Lynn Kable from Amherst Glebe Arts Response, and I'd like to introduce you to Tamar Rogoff, who was the director and the person who conceived of the Ivye project, which was the piece that you saw in the film. And she was also the director and producer, co-producer of the Summer in Ivye film, which you just saw. I had one comment from the audience which said, "A wonderful film." Most noteworthy comment was, we didn't act in the film, we lived it. And Tamar, I'd like to ask you, how do you think you've changed in the 25 years since you were actually directing the live performance in Ivye?
Well, I think the film said so much, but since then, a lot of things have come into perspective for me. The original feeling was one of complete shock that I was 40 years old and I had never heard that my family was in the Holocaust or had anything to do with it. And, you know, I'm an artist. I'm a very experiential person. If I'm going to learn something, I better learn it from an eyewitness. That's how I learn best. So I thought, you know, so in the beginning, it was just wanting to connect and to be close to these people who were close and knew my relatives, you know, who were killed there. And so it was about being an artist and using my tools to do my exploration and bringing my own daughter, so that this then became a part of my life. The way I thought about it was that, you know, I'd never heard of these people and I wanted to know them. And I was very interested in not so much the perpetrator and the victim part of it, but I was just interested in what was the life before it was extinguished from Ivye. I wanted to experience it. So in a sort of a simple way, the way that you can do with art, I sequestered myself within this particular part of the story. But being there and having the eyewitness accounts, which you're lucky enough today, you'll meet Evie and Manny, you know, I learned in such a deep way. And what's fascinating is that there was one window of opportunity to do this work in Belarus, and it was that summer. I mean, now you could do nothing in Belarus. It's, you know, such a difficult place. And, you know, and now none of those survivors are alive any longer. So it was this moment where I wanted to embrace what was missing. And then I made the film because I then wanted to have it live longer. And when I came home, I was brought up in a very secular way, probably because my dad didn't really was protecting me from being too Jewish. So we didn't belong to a synagogue, but we did have the holidays. And when I got home, I thought, I better have a Jewish wedding. I'd never had a Jewish wedding. And every time that Sabbath bride passed by, I wanted to be a part of that. And my daughter, who sort of stood in for me, was right there experiencing that wedding in the performance. So I had a huppah and I had a rabbi and I had the klezmer music, which you heard, you know, in the film. I had it at this wedding. I had been married 30 years before I had a Jewish wedding. But anyway, you know, it's just each year I show this to my grandchildren. It's, you know, it's a way of having had this experience, not keeping it to myself. And there have been so many offshoots. For example, Tamara Borodok, she's the one who put the eggs in the car and slammed down the hood. The woman who, I called them my fairy godmothers, the women in Ivye who made all this happen, along with Lynn Kable. You know, she moved to Israel. All the Jews left that town and she moved to Israel, but every year she brings people to visit. And so as a result of this film, the children learned the Soviet period had closed down all the knowledge of the Holocaust of Jews. And so it was just after we had so many things, ways we could use this. And most important for me is what I learned, the actual facts of the Holocaust, which I didn't know. And one of them was that people were killed right outside their town, and not just in concentration camps. So I feel like this Ivye project and then the film, is intrinsically a part of my own DNA now. I lived it.
And the other two people who are on our panel today lived it very much as children, and they were in fact hidden children in the countries where they wound up. Evi Blaikie, you want to wave? Evi was born in Paris to parents of Hungarian Jewish extraction, and she is going to tell you about her experiences. And Manfred Marko was born, Evi was born in 1939. Manny was born in 1929. And he was born in Berlin, Germany, to parents of Polish Jewish extraction. His father ran a wonderful business and was a boss was doing very well, was a very prosperous person in Berlin, and then Hitler came to power. So they're going to tell you about their actual experiences. So Evi, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened in your life?
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, as Lynn said, I was born in 39, but in January, which means that the war didn't break out till September. So I was close to a year old, and nothing really happened in the first couple of years. But in 1941, the Germans got into Paris, and that's when they started rounding up Jews, but also my father was a member of the Communist Party. They were at that time the ones who were against the fascists and the Nazis, and therefore the Germans, he was one of the first that they were looking for, these people. So he went immediately underground. I was left with my mother, and we tried to get to the south of France, but we couldn't because the bridge we were about to cross was blown up. So everybody had to go back to Paris. People were scrambling all over at this point. And my mother left me one day with a neighbor to go shopping, and she was arrested on the street and shipped to one of the ammunition factories in Germany, actually Austria. So there I was, a toddler, left alone, and a neighbor called an aunt of mine who picked me up and who was wondering what to do with me. And at that time, Hungary, where my family was, looked safe. Hungary was the first country to ally itself with Germany. But so far, it looked like a safe place for Jews, and many went there from many countries. So she managed to get me to Hungary on my cousin's passport, who was a boy. She cut my hair, she dressed me up as a little boy. And I arrived in Hungary to be with my mother's sisters. I was really too young to understand what was happening. I forgot about my father. Eventually, even my mother, my aunts adored me. I had, and I had a cousin, Peter, 5 years older than I. He became my brother. And we lived for a while the rest of Europe was being devastated by the Germans. We lived in relative safety in Hungary. Polish Jews, Lithuanians, Belgians, Dutch, French were being deported. We were not. But there were certain restrictions. We couldn't go to certain schools. We could only go to Jewish doctors. But these were not things that affected me. And this went on. And also Hungarian Jews were very assimilated. And they thought it can never happen to us. We are Hungarians and we are allied with Germany, therefore nothing will happen. And this went on until 1944, the last year of the war, when the Allies were already gaining ground. One day there was a ring at our doorbell, and when we opened, there was my mother, weighing 60 pounds, looking like she was going to just fall down in front of us. I didn't recognize her, but I heard my aunt say, Magda, and I knew that was my real mother's name. To me, she was some kind of a fairy godmother up there. I didn't know her. And I saw this woman and I started to cry. By the way, it was my 5th birthday.
Manny,
just one more.
Yes.
And this was January 44, the last year of the war. We thought we were safe, but on March 19th, 3 months later, the Germans marched into Hungary and started rounding up all the Jews. And that's where our travels and travails became terrible. And Manny had a totally different experience, of course, right?
So yes. Manny, we're going to pick up your story when your parents decided to leave Germany.
Well, yes. They were not the first ones to leave. As soon as Hitler came around, people thought, oh, he won't last. So people stayed. I don't know why we stayed longer. His brother and family had left. I don't know, tens of thousands of people, not just Jews, intellectuals, professors, artists, many people left. Anyway, 1938, we, in the late summer of 1938, my father took my sister, a year older than I am, or was, and I was told we're going on summer vacation, but on the train, my sister told me, no, we're going to try to get to Belgium. The reason the whole family didn't go is because my brother was only 1 year old, and to be smuggled, nobody knew exactly what it entailed. I'm sure my father didn't have any idea of what we had to go through. Anyway, the first attempt failed. My father then, and we will return to Germany because we were wound up in the Netherlands rather than in Belgium, and they sent us back to Germany. The second time, my father went alone and then made arrangements for a Belgian guy who lived near the border, which is the area that's called Eupen, which once belonged to Germany. The people there speak German. So the family, that is my mother, my 1 year old brother, and my sister and me, we were going to travel in the man's car as his family. So since they spoke German, where the man was from, in case the border guard talked or asked questions of my mother or us, it was normal that we spoke German. We made it for a little adventure along the way. We chose, or I don't know, somebody chose to do this on September 26th, when Hitler was giving a speech, which of course was transmitted by radio throughout Germany. And we figured, well, every good German will be listening to Hitler. That includes the border guards, and therefore they'll get us through quickly. Yes, it happened. However, while our driver was in the little guard shack or whatever little house there, because they were not outside, they were listening to Hitler. While he was gone, my brother my 1 year old brother on the lap of my mother in the front seat of this car sees this bundle of keys, and he pulls the keys out of the ignition. The man had a garage, and therefore he had many keys, car keys. So when he came back, And remember, it was evening, it was dark, there was not much light. He's fumbling to find the right key. The border guard who had opened the gate already, after a while, put it back down and came over to look, shined his flashlight in the car, looked at us in the back seat, my sister and me. We pretended to sleep. Anyway, I don't know how long it took for the man to find the right key, but it seems like an eternity. It seems like we'll never get through. But he finally finds the right key, and we wind up in Belgium, where we then went to Antwerp, where this is sort of 1940. Then at the beginning, the Germans didn't bother Jews much, but then eventually they created a Jewish agency or Jewish board. All Jews had to sign, and then by 1941, then they sent something like a summons to mostly young people to report for work. Bring a small suitcase, report to the station. And eventually my father also got an invitation, and that's when we quickly moved to Brussels.
Okay. Tamar, I have here 3 questions from the audience that relate to the film before we get totally into the war. One question is there a video of the full performance, or are pieces of it incorporated into this film?
Yeah, there is. I would have to go searching, but yeah, it was a kind of a decision to make a documentary. At the time, I probably didn't have the funds to do both, but I have all the footage of the actual performance.
And the second
But just I would say that, I mean, you can also, if you go to tamarrogoff.com, you can purchase Summer in Ivye, the film. And if you want to get in touch with me, and we can see about getting you footage of the whole performance.
This question is, can you discuss the girls running into the woods?
So that was my actual daughter, Ariel, who was 16 at the time. And so she was there, you know, as my representative. It's like as if the image is like just going into the photographs, the few photographs that we had, just wanting to feel her part, her connection. And so it's on 2 levels, which is where I always work. And the other one level was the reality that she's my daughter and I want her to carry this history. And to feel what really happened within a performance somehow was almost stronger than if she had done a lot of research and read things. And so, you know, she lived there for the few months that we were rehearsing. And so it's just me in the present trying to claim the past.
Also, this is a question, and I don't know whether you know the answer to this. Is Ivye today more modern? Are there cars, TV, and iPhones instead of the cows in the streets?
No, I don't think they have made much progress at all. It's a dirt road town. So no, my feeling is that they're very, very slow. They were the slowest people after the Soviet Union broke up to take the Lenin statues. They did nothing. They did nothing. So they never really felt like they had left the Soviet Union, which is sad because now they are so aligned with Putin and all that. It's really, really a very, as the actors said who came from Lithuania, the armpit of the world.
It's sad.
Very sad.
All right, so now we're back to Ivye and Nanny. Ivye, since you were such a young child, how much did you understand about what being in hiding meant? Okay.
I didn't understand the reason. I knew fear, there was fear all over, and I was afraid with everybody else, but I didn't know what I was afraid of, which was really the worst. I was told I was 5 years old that my name would no longer be Evie. They gave me another name, another birthday, and I was told that if I forgot, we could all be killed. And of course, this didn't make sense to a 5-year-old, and yet I did my part and I didn't make any mistakes. I kept my name, and I want to put it here that many children had this and many forgot and were caught and killed. And actually, I just want to tell everybody that of the Jewish children born in Europe between 1933 and 1945, 10% survived. That's all. And Manny and I are part of that 10%. But we went into hiding. We went to a place very similar to what you saw in Ivye, a village where we had false papers.
Evie, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. It's Lynn. Manny's computer, Celine's computer, his daughter, crashed. And so you are going to be talking until they get it fixed. And so feel free to wax eloquent and longer.
Okay, just tell me when I have to finish talking.
Okay.
So we went to this village with false papers. My mother, who was a fugitive, which I didn't tell you her story, but she had been in a ammunitions factory where she had been caught sabotaging and was on her way to a death camp when she passed out, and they thought she had
recording in progress.
And there he is back. Anyway, when she arrived in Hungary, as I told you, we then made, we got false papers. We went to the farm, and that's where we were for this was the last year of the war, I have to tell you. And when the Germans came into Hungary, they already had practice on how to get the Jews and put them into concentration camp, and they shot them into the Danube. It was horrible. In that last year, out of 830,000 Jews in Greater Hungary, in 1 year, they killed 570,000.
All right. Did you have any close calls when you were in hiding?
Oh my goodness, many. And one of them was, as I said, we were given false names, including my cousin Peter, who understood much more than I, because he was 11 years old and he wasn't terrified. And one day we were walking in the village, and the policeman stopped us. He didn't know us, and he said to Peter, "What's your name?" And Peter suddenly drew a blank. He couldn't remember the new name. He couldn't tell his real name, and he just went red and started sweating, and the policeman started shaking him, said, "I asked you your name." And I remembered his name. And I said, "Leave him alone. His name is Janos Schmutzler." And the policeman said, "Well, why doesn't he tell me?" And I don't know how I came up with this. I was barely 6 years old. And I said, "He's shell-shocked from the bombs in Budapest. He can't talk." So they let us go. And that was one of our close calls, but there were many. And is Manny ready to talk?
Manny?
Yes.
Are you
Yes.
back? Yes. Okay.
Yes, I'm back.
We're happy to welcome you back. When you were in hiding, sorry, can you give us an example of a close call that you had when you were living with a family, perhaps?
Yes. So one of the families I lived with, they lived in sort of a working class village that had been constructed by the city. And the father and son both worked for the railway, the father in Brussels. The son was sent to Germany, where he worked in the rail yard. They also had two other children. that were Hungarian. And one day, a knock at the door, we open the door and two men come in the standard Gestapo uniform, which was a leather trench coat. They identified themselves as Gestapo. And one man said to the other, as they came in and saw us, the three children, he said in German, here are the Jewish, and these are the Jewish children. Then he proceeded to ask our names a bit before I could answer, and I don't know what I would have said. I wasn't properly trained in giving my wartime name. The housewife came and they talked to her, then took her upstairs, and after a while came back down and on leaving said, we'll be back tomorrow. The lady of the house told us they were looking behind pictures under the bed and for hiding places. Later on, we find out forgot to say, they didn't take me. I wasn't Hungarian. So I have a feeling, first I always thought, well, they were just nice policemen who were not anti-Semitic, and that's why they left me. But then again, it may have been because they thought I was also Hungarian. At that point, as Evi mentioned before, they didn't touch Hungarian Jews. Anyway, it turned out that the son in Germany and several others of his co-workers were given 5 days leave to go home. Since it took them 3 days to get to Brussels, they decided to stay an extra 3 days. In those 3 days, the rail yard where they worked was heavily bombed. And that's why the Germans thought that they suspected him anyway already as a troublemaker. They suspected him of having a transmitter at home, and they had notified the British that the importance of the yard, and that's why it was bombed. He was, upon his return, he was put in jail, beaten, threatened, and so on, but of course he didn't admit anything. So that was probably, well, one of the worst. There were other instances where.
Okay, you're frozen again, Manny?
Yes.
Okay, now you're unfrozen. Go ahead, keep going.
Pardon?
You are unfrozen now. You were frozen for a minute. But now you unfroze, so that's good.
Yeah, there was another instance in the period before we went into hiding. My father had to earn a living, so he became a dealer in foreign currency, which of course was strictly forbidden and punishable by the Germans. Yes, the trade in dollars, pounds, gold coins, even gold ingots was very popular, but illegal. One day I became a courier for my father. One day I was delivering dollars to a family that lived in an apartment building. I went up the stairs. They lived on the 3rd or 4th level. And the man came down the stairs. They're very narrow stairs, barely wide enough for 2 people. So I couldn't really see anybody behind him, but as soon as he saw me, he hissed at me in a very offensive way and told me to get the hell out. I turned around, went back down the stairs, came outside, and there was a small crowd looking at the house, waiting for something to happen. They had seen the Gestapo go in. Anyway, if I had been caught with the dollars, I wouldn't be alive today.
And Evi, I know that your family and the family that hid you were active in saving some other families, yes?
No.
And also saving some young men?
Oh, no, the family was not involved.
Was it just your mother? Just your mother?
They didn't know that we were Jews. We had false papers, and as far as they knew, we were in the country to avoid the bombs, the Allied bombs in Budapest. So they had no idea. And yes, my mother was involved in saving 2 young men. There were barracks near us, which my cousin Peter discovered, where they had young Jewish boys in there. And they were, and my cousin witnessed a terrible thing when the Germans brought he was hiding in the bushes with a friend and saw these several young men brought out by the Germans, shot into a ditch. And he was 11 years old when he witnessed that, and he couldn't move because the Germans would have caught him. And he ran home and he couldn't talk. He had a fever, and my mother tried to find out what happened when eventually she did and realized that they were these young men, young Jews being incarcerated and killed constantly. She tried to help a couple, which happened in such an odd way. 2 German officers showed up one day, knocked on our door. And we thought that was the end. Here are German officers, but they had no idea that we were Jews. They came because my mother and her friend were 2 young women and they wanted company. And my mother then said, "We heard that you had barracks with young people." We said, "Yes, filthy Jews. What do you want with them?" And she said, "Well, we could use help on the farm. Could you send us a couple to work?" And sure, and we would, I'm sure the farmers would give you food in exchange. And the German officers showed up with these 2 young men who worked for us. Of course, they knew we were Jews. We knew they were, but everybody kept quiet. And finally, they asked my mother if she could help them escape. And this is what happened. We went into the forest with a big bag next to the barracks. Peter and I played football with the guard at the gate of the barracks while my mother went around and put peasants' clothes under the gate for these boys to pick up. They were women's clothing because the people from the village, the women, would go in there, clean and cook for the Germans and then leave at night. And these boys disguised themselves as these peasant women and left, came to the farm. And that night, my mother said to me, "Tonight you're going to sleep in the barn." And I was terrified because they were big black spiders and I hated them and I was terrified of them. But my mother said, "You have to do it." And of course we did. We went and we had to sleep on top of these bales of hay. We didn't know why. My mother said we had to. And in the middle of the night, the stable doors fly open, Germans come in with flashlights and bayonets, and they're bayoneting all the straw everywhere until they saw us. And of course, they didn't bayonet kids. So they left us alone on top of this bale of hay. And of course, what happened is my mother had hidden the 2 boys under us. We were sleeping on top of them, and that's how she saved their lives. And they were there for a few days without the peasants knowing, and then they went on their way. And I wish I could tell you that I knew what happened to them, but I don't.
Manny, you spent some time at a boys' camp as a hidden child. Can you tell us about that camp and why you had to leave there?
Okay, after the Gestapo left, I left as well. I notified my sister, who was also hidden in that same small community, and we went to where our parents were in hiding, including our little brother. From there, then I stayed with my parents for a while, and until the secret organization, which consisted of mainly young women. It all started by a Belgian school teacher who one day found herself with only half the children in the class and found out that the Jewish children had been taken away and sent away. Back to the camp. Okay, so the secret organization then took me and 8 other Jewish boys to the Ardennes, a very small village in the Ardennes. Although it's on the map, it's called Épreuve. And there was this former sanatorium that's now served for boys who had been sick or who had a lot of sickness in the family. It was sort of a rehab, recuperation camp. And they put a bunch of Jewish boys in there. When we got there, there were already 10 Jewish boys, including my cousin. By the way, his name is the same as mine, Manfred, but of course we all had different Belgium names. This camp was not only for the Christian Belgian boys to recuperate, it also became a hiding place for 19 Jewish boys because there were no Germans in the area. Oh yeah, and also the staff, actually, half of the staff was also in hiding. There was an American, he was a counselor, and his whole family, except one sister who was married to a Belgian, but the rest of the family, and it was a family of 7 children, were also hiding in the village. The camp was run on a Boy Scout basis. Every morning, bugle call, raising of the flag, until one day, no bugle call, no flag, and the Jewish boys were pulled out and we were taken by train to Namur because the Germans were coming into the area. This is part of the Ardennes that has many caves. So a lot of the Belgian underground fighters probably were hidden in the caves. Our camp chaplain, who were, of course, the Catholic cassock, under his cassock, he wore the Belgian army uniform. I guess he also counseled the underground in the various caves. There we were taken to the parish house of a Catholic priest by the name of Abbé André. The parish house also had a small theater. It was pretty big. From the street, it looked like a normal house, but from the inside, it was quite large. And there we stayed until new places could be found for us. And we also had an escape route because the theater, the balcony from the theater had a fire escape to the neighboring backyard, sort of, which then we could go to the garden and out the front door into a street. Belgian blocks are not like New York or many American city blocks. They're not square. It was actually quite a very large block that extended, and yeah, it wasn't just quickly around the corner. No, it was quite a way. One time there was an alert. We thought some stranger had rang the bell, and another boy and I escaped that way. We walked around, this is winter. We walked around for hours in the park and didn't know what to do, how to find out if it was safe to go back. Fortunately, this boy and I had been invited by, well, actually not us particularly, but this family, a doctor who ran a lab, told the Abbé that they would feed 2 boys for the main meal in Belgium, which is on at lunchtime. And so the 2 of us ate there every day at lunch. And so we went to them to go check and see if it was safe to return to the parish house. They did, and we went back. Eventually, of course, I was actually taken by Abbé André himself on the interurban streetcar to a town called Ivye, where I was placed with a family and stayed there till liberation, which was September 1944.
And okay, Manny, how did you find out the war was over? How did you find out you could come out of hiding?
The war was not over. Liberation, there's a big difference. September 3rd, Brussels was liberated. We were liberated about 2 weeks later, although not that great a distance, but sometimes the army had to slow down in order to in order that the supplies could catch up with them. People, it was of course strictly prohibited to listen to the BBC, but we did. It was also jammed. It was very difficult, but you could hear enough. People kept up with where the Allies were. I mean, we knew about the invasion in Italy. We knew about the invasion in Normandy. Word spread. Those who didn't have a radio or couldn't listen to the radio, other people told them. And also you could hear the guns, the gunfire. Actually, this town is on the river, and the river road runs along, the road runs along the river. So the Allies, actually the Americans liberated Wheat. They came along the river and we could hear the guns and so on. And of course and then of course everybody went to the main street and thanks to the liberating armies. That's another whole long story on how the Belgian people behaved and treated the liberators after 4 years of, not only Jews suffered under the Germans, everybody in Belgium suffered under the Germans.
Thank you. Evie,
Yes.
the last part of the war for you was pretty active. You used to see a lot of shells,
Oh, yeah.
cannon shells.
Yeah, yes. Well, my experience with liberation was very different from Manny's. First of all, we were liberated months later because we were much further east and the Allies were coming that way. And we were right in the line of fire. The Soviets were coming from the east and the Germans were there with us. The Allies were coming from the west and we were constantly being shelled from both sides. We never dared to go out. Sometimes there was a lull in the fighting and we would go out and collect the shells. And one day there were these huge shells we had not seen before. My mother looked at it and she said, the Soviets are here. And I have to tell you this, a quick story. That night, there was a lull in the fighting and suddenly in the middle of the night, the doors fly open and 3 Asian looking people whom we had never seen Asians, but they were part of the Soviet army. They burst in, they took my mother, they took a friend who was with us, and everybody was screaming and frightened, and my mother suddenly said, stop! And they were so shocked they did for a minute. And my mother just said to Peter and me in Hungarian, they don't hurt children, just stay there. No matter what you hear, don't move. And then they took the women out. And Peter and I were huddled together for what seemed like hours. And then suddenly we heard my mother screaming something and we couldn't stand it anymore. We ran out and we saw her and her friend backed up against the hayloft with the Soviet soldiers coming towards them with bayonets. And we ran to them and we thought, this is the end. My mother was trying to tell them that we're Jews, don't hurt us, we're hiding. But they didn't understand. And she was screaming, Yid, Juif, Jido, Jude, in every language she could, but they didn't understand. And suddenly this armored truck comes into the yard with an officer and he stops everything. And he comes to my mother and he says, Yid, which is Jew. And my mother says, yeah, Yid. And he says something in Russian, which we didn't understand, but it was obvious. Prove it. Well, how do you prove you're Jewish? My cousin Peter was not circumcised. His father had not allowed it because he was frightened. So my mother just thought, and she said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And this officer replied, Baruch Shem Kevad Malchus Yalom Bo'ed. And that's how we proved we were Jews. And that was our story of liberation. But it was by the Soviets, not the Americans. It was very different.
I would like to ask the people in the audience now if they would do another round of questions, because we're at the end of the war and we are going to talk a little more about what life was like after the war for the hidden children. But would you please give any questions that you have to the ushers, and ushers, would you bring them up to me on the second floor, please? And Evie,
Yes.
I know that you have very strong feelings about what happened to you after the war. Obviously, your mother had been through a lot.
Yes. Well, as Manny said, just because there was liberation, the war was not over. And I don't think the war is ever over while any of us survivors are alive. Because I don't know about Manny, but for me, the post-war years were even worse. Because as a small child, even though it was frightening, terribly frightening, but I had my mother to look after me. And after the war, she was too sick to do so. I was placed in orphanages. I was in orphanages till I was 15. And so I felt very abandoned. We had very little, you know, post-war Europe had very little food, very little anything. And also we were old enough to realize what had happened to us. And we were very angry children. And that made us, we didn't listen to anybody. We didn't care anymore. And we had a very hard time in school. Just because the war was over, anti-Semitism was not. You know, I was told in the schoolyard in England that, no, you can't be Jewish. Jews have horns. You know, things like that. And we fought. We were angry. We got into fights, literally fist fights. And this anger stayed with us for a very long time. So it was very hard for the children after the war, those who survived.
You told me the other day that you found it very unusual to try to have a family yourself because you had not had a lot of experience in a healthy family when you were young.
Yes, I didn't know what a family was. I had not experienced a normal family. So I did get married. And by the way, I made sure I did not marry a Jew. I was terrified of having Jewish children.
Wow.
But still, my marriage was not successful, as by the way, is a very high percentage of hidden children's marriages fail. Mostly, I think, because we were taught never to trust. And when you teach someone not to trust, that stays with you, and certainly not good for a healthy marriage. I didn't know how to deal with my children. I had never been a child. I didn't know what children needed. All I was trying to do is raise them to be able to take care of themselves in case I wasn't there. And, you know, I didn't allow my husband to be a father to my children because I didn't even know what the role of a father was. So all these things, you know, they last into your adulthood. And then, of course, being a mother, I'm guilty because that's what my children say.
And Manny, what was your experience after the war? Your whole family survived.
Not the whole family, my immediate family.
Your immediate family survived. I'm
There were
sorry, I
5 of
stand
us.
corrected.
We 5 of us survived. We were very lucky, except, well, it was much harder for my brother, who was 5 when he went into hiding. He was 7 when he came out of hiding. He didn't know who his parents were. He'd been away for 2 years, even though my mother would visit every now and then. My mother was blonde, blue eyes, so she passed easily, had fake papers, but of course didn't speak much French. And anyway, but my sister and I, being much older, we of course knew where our parents were. We had been in their hiding place. We corresponded, not directly, and of course we used fake names. Actually, the mail to my parents went to somebody who lived across the street, who also helped them with shopping and various things. My mother went out. My father did not go out for 2 years. Yeah, so I could see the difference between my sister and myself. We did not have this mental and physical suffering that Ivye had. So, but everybody is different, and everybody hid in different places, and so everybody's story is also different. I must say we were very lucky. We had it. It's, you know, now that we talk about it, but then I think my parents were hidden in this house, and next door lived a Russian engineer. The Gestapo came for him 7 times, day and night, and it was an extremely quiet street. And of course, there were very few cars. There was very little noise. So when they came knocking on the door next door, it sounded like they were knocking at their door. They went to this 7 times. I mean, the mental suffering that people in hiding had. Yeah, I was there once when they knocked on the door, and actually there was still another family living in the house, and we, the children, went up to the attic rooms and hid above the attic rooms, but fortunately it wasn't the knocking at this house. It was next door, so we survived that one also. But yeah, there was a lot of mental stress. And well, there were also other things. When in August of 1944, when I was in hiding in Ivye, I was hidden in the open. I did go out with the family, visit friends and so on. Actually, when the bombing started, by August 1944, Allies were bombing more and more railway bridges and railway. We went out of town to their friends on a farm. Their men were also involved in the underground. They had even built a hiding place in the barn. They showed it to me because they knew I was Jewish. By the way, when Abbé André took me to Ivye, the first stop he made was at the cathedral, and he went to talk to the bishop. He didn't take me along, but I suppose he was telling the bishop I was a new resident in town. Yeah, Belgium, priests, nuns were very, very good toward Jews, most of them, or many of them.
Ivye André, I believe is his name is on the wall of the righteous.
Yes.
And could you explain what that is?
And what?
Explain what the wall of righteous.
Oh, that's in at the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, where they honor people who saved Jews during the war. Actually, Abbé André, after liberation and after the war, helped other new immigrants. He also became chaplain at the local jail, where many foreigners were kept who had come into Belgium and misbehaved. We went to see him in 1964. He was later on invited and came to New York. He was also invited to Israel, where he was honored. Unfortunately, when he came to New York, I was living in San Francisco, so I didn't get to see him. He died fairly young. He always had a heart problem from his youth on. Yeah, he was a mensch.
Yeah. Tamar, do you remember any of the survivor stories of the people from Ivye?
Oh my goodness, yes. While we were there in rehearsal, we had one woman, the Sonia, the one who played the school teacher, the one who danced, that you met in the film. She would work, first of all, the cast came from many different countries. And so one night a week we would get together with her, and she was the historian, and she would tell us the stories. And, you know, the thing is that because we were people from Lithuania, Estonia, we had all had different stories. We didn't all understand in the same way. And so Mottel, who was
The shoemaker.
I guess that was part of his role. He was married to Maria, who was in the window. Yeah, Mottel was probably about 14. And they had kind of gotten wind of it, that there was going to be trouble. What they did in Ivye was, like several months before they rounded up all the 2,000 plus people, they rounded up a smaller number, like 40 of the younger men who had power. And they said they were taking them to a work camp and they should pack their things. And I mean, they kept up this ruse, but really they just walked the mile and were killed earlier so that they couldn't organize against. So a lot of old people and children and were left. And Motto wanted his family to bury themselves and breathe out of a straw. And on this day when he knew they were going to round them up. And his family refused, but he did it. And he survived the day when the 2,000 people were rounded up and killed. And in fact, he was asked to bury them. He was asked to go to the pit and bury them. And his stories were so horrendous because some people weren't quite dead and he had to bury them. And he told us that the babies, they didn't waste a bullet. They just threw them against a tree and smashed their skulls. And these things that had to be true. He was the eyewitness. And then he said that actually it wasn't mostly Germans, it was Lithuanian soldiers, in which case the Lithuanians became very upset with this news and said it's not true. But it was so like, it was heartrending because Mottel said, no, I was there. And they were not Germans who did the killing. And this was another fact for us that was not just concentration camps, it was not just Germans. There were other things that were going on. And I think that story really, really stayed with me. And the story of Maria, which we incorporated, where she was a young girl, and it's the scene at the window with the samovar, where Maria was given to Polish neighbors for safekeeping. And one wonderful thing, which is not really in the movie, is that at the end, there were like hundreds and hundreds of people came to see it. And some people came every day to see it. They walked through the fields, and some people came on buses. And Lynn, did a mammoth job about raising money so that we could have people come from different cities and even different countries. And they were given dinner after the performance. There's a lot of talk. And people were admitting that they hid Jews for the first time after the performance. So there were a lot of stories that when the performance was over, and there was no clapping, which was always really interesting because in that part of the world, they do a lot of clapping after performances, but nobody clapped. And everybody just walked out and started to talk. And so a lot of things came up. And one of the reasons, that someone was there was because they happened to be in prison during that time. And so they weren't they weren't even in Ivye. So people escape various ways. And I heard a lot of stories. In fact, the stories that they wanted me to tell were the stories of how they were killed. And I was not equipped to do that because I didn't feel that was my story. And so my story was more about what was there and what was lost, and setting it at that memorial and having people walk the same routes brought the whole thing, without my sort of feeling like I was overstepping. The fact that the survivors who had those experiences were in the piece, they really carried the stories and the horrors without having to be very, very specific. So we learned an awful lot on those nights with Sonia.
And there is another question that I've been handed. How did you get the crew, the actors, everyone who worked on the program, and how did you raise the money?
Oh, unbelievable. It's just unbelievable how it was done. But the money is very interesting because Soros, who you've probably heard of, gave us a great deal of money, but didn't give it to us directly, gave it to the people in the town who were going to be the ones procuring the food for us every day, the ones who did, the movers and shakers of the whole piece were basically 3 women in the town who worked along with Lynn and Bonnie and a few of our producers. So giving the money to them empowered them. It was their production. And that was very, very helpful. And the trust for mutual understanding, I said, I think what we're going to do is maybe 3 or 4 performances, and I would expect maybe 300 people, which was not what happened, but that alone was enough for them. And they gave us like $40,000. And then Dancing in the Streets is another organization, because it was a site-specific, community-based work. They gave us money. So we gathered it. And I did some research trips, and so we appealed to everybody and everything. It was first the money to do the performance, and then it was the money to make the film. And how we got the crew was because the reason I got to that part of the world and found out quite inadvertently that this had happened to my family was because I was working with ballet companies and dance companies in 1991. And so I was there, and first in Estonia, and then happened to be in Lithuania. And so that's how I got to know people in the theater. And they followed me and they came. So we just gathered, we did auditions in all the different countries, and we were able to feed people, pay people, and house people. And it was a great help to be able to pay them.
They also wanted to be paid in dollars because the money, when we were over there, there was hyperinflation. And when Tamar first went there, it was 10,000 Belarusian rubles to the dollar. By the time we left, it was 25,000 Belarusian rubles to the dollar. Well, one of the things that happened was sometimes the banks closed because literally they ran out of money. And you can imagine that, money to buy a loaf of bread for 5 loaves of bread for all the people in the cast and the crew would maybe cost 75,000 rubles. I mean, so they were always running out of money in the banks, and then the banks would close for a few days and you couldn't get money. So you couldn't get food and you couldn't get money. So the people wanted to be paid in dollars because they figured that was a better way to be sure that they could not only buy bread this week, but maybe next week also.
Yeah.
And it was quite astounding. It really was.
But what it was that what Lynn was part of, we made this international community. And in some ways, that was an example unto itself of how the world could be. People from all these different countries, not even speaking the same languages. They were all the crew, and a lot of people in Ivye, the whole town participated. I mean, it was like an incredible, I mean, nothing ever happened in that town. There's not even one hotel in that town. We had to stay in a different town. There's not even one restaurant. So you can imagine what us being there, how it changed things.
And I did say that we would mention Frank London, who did the music, who you heard speaking Spanish with the cello player. Frank was a co-founder with Alicia, who did the workshop earlier of the modern klezmer group, the Klezmatics. And so they worked together at that time. Actually, they were both working with the Klezmatics, and they worked together, I guess, until around the turn of this century. One question I wanted to ask finally to Evie and to Manny, when you all in 1991 when you had the first Hidden Children convention?
Yes.
Yes.
You all didn't talk about these experiences much until then. And could you talk a little bit about what it meant to you to start talking about them after so many years?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, for me, it was amazing. I mean, until then, I had not spoken about it. Also, because I don't know if Manny had this experience, but for us, it was, first of all, if you hadn't been in a camp, you weren't a survivor. And children, especially, were not listened to. Oh, she'll forget, they sent her to school, give her food, and they won't remember anything. And nobody ever listened to our experiences. And in 91, when we got together, that was the first time that we talked about it. And I don't know how many of them, but there were a lot of tears in that place that day, right? And I came home from that weekend and started writing. I just had to get it out. And that's how my book came into being, because...
What is your book? What is your book? Tell us.
It's called Magda's Daughter. And look here, look, can you see it?
No.
You need to move it back a little bit.
No, I don't know. Doesn't seem to work anyway.
Okay, well, it is available on Amazon. I know that.
Yes, it's Magda's, and I just had to write and write and write. And this is where it was so strange. I started writing about what happened after the war, because that was even more painful at that time, until I realized that I had to go back. But it was incredibly painful. But it was cathartic, and I had to do it.
And you made a film in 2019?
Yes, I think it was, 18, it doesn't matter, 17, 18. A film was made, yes, about 4 of us hidden children, but my part was larger than the others, about Hungarian hidden children. It's called Remember Us. Yes, it was based on the book. And
you want to give your email?
Sure, it's Evi Blaikie, EBLAIKIE0@gmail.com. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But it was a momentous time, that 1991 conference. And, I don't know if you know that they expected about 300 people and 1,500 showed up, because nobody knew how many hidden children there were.
Mm-hmm.
We had, remember that, Manny?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So Manny, tell us what that conference was like for you and for your daughter. Celine has been helping Manny today with the tech. So if she's sitting next to you, maybe she'll say a few words too.
Yes, because, feeling the lung. Well, it sort of freed us. We felt inferior because we didn't consider ourselves hidden children.
Survivors.
But also later on, I learned that what we thought were the lucky children, the one that were sent to England, the kinder transport, well, there were other groups and elsewhere, but those are the largest. We always thought they were so lucky, but then it turned out the ones that never saw their parents again, especially the younger ones, they suffered tremendously because they were thrown away in their minds. They were thrown away by their parents. They were abandoned by their parents, and many didn't have a good experience. And that's where in one of the meetings at the convention was a woman, well, she was younger than, she was only, I think, 2 when she was was sent to England. And that many years later, she was still suffering tremendously. And Celine will say something about her experience at the convention.
This is Celine Marko Alper, and she is Manny's daughter.
So I don't remember too much, but things I remember, the conference had breakout sessions for the next generation, for the children of the survivors. So those are the classes or the sessions that I attended. So they would talk about things like generational trauma, things that affected the next generation that we didn't even know were being taught or triggered by what our parents went through. In one breakout session, I remember someone talking about at their home, and I believe it was in Long Island. I don't know why I remember that detail, but in their home, in the basement, there were packed suitcases, cans of food stored, and they thought for most of their lives that that was normal, that everybody had suitcases packed at all times and extra food for the whole neighborhood, basically, until they started going to other people's houses and they got older and they realized, no, that was their family. It wasn't, everybody wasn't raised like that. So it was very interesting, definitely.
By the way, Lynn, you said the end of the war. No, the end of the war for us in Belgium was 8 months after we were liberated. But in the meantime, when this massive German attack in the Ardennes, Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge happened, we were ready to flee again.
Wow.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are other families as well. I mean, every day we watch the news to see if we could stay or it was time to flee again.
Well, I really want to thank everybody for participating this afternoon. I wonder if there's anybody in the audience who has any questions that they want to scream out or write about. And I wonder if there's anything that any of our participants this afternoon haven't gotten a chance to say. And I'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not hearing the patter of little feet coming up the stairs. So I'm going to thank you very, very much. So Tamar Rogoff.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you,
Evi
everybody.
Blaikie,
Aye.
Manfred Marko, Celine Marko Alper, Michael Ozment, who has helped us with the tech this afternoon, and Michael Anderson, who has helped us also with the tech for the theater. And thank you very much. And I hope that you found this afternoon interesting. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye.